The 19th century German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned us, saying, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back at you." On that Tuesday morning of September 11, 2001, the monsters showed up in New York, in Washington, D.C., and in Pennsylvania. Al-Qaeda terrorists took over 4 commercial aircraft filled with unsuspecting civilian passengers who had innocently boarded airplanes that morning, going somewhere for work, for vacation, to visit family, or whatever the throngs of people crowding airports are doing that day. 2 were flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York. 1 crashed into the Pentagon on Washington, and the 4th did not make it to whatever the intended target in Washington was, but was instead brought down in Pennsylvania by brave passengers who died to put up resistance to the terrorists. America and the world were in shock. At first, it didn't seem like it could have even been possible. But shock quickly gave way to anger blended with fear. There was resolve in our government to find out who was behind this bloody, cowardly attack and to punish them in a way that was revenge laced with a warning. Al-Qaeda had found an unwitting partner in Taliban-ruled Afghanistan, where they could base their terrorist training camps, and so that poor nation filled with people who largely didn't even have access to TV or radio news, who were broadly too illiterate to read about 9/11, were invaded by American troops, and most of them had no idea why. One of the American interrogators, one of my old college roommates from 2 generations ago, told me that most of the people he interviewed thought that the 9/11 attack was Afghanistan's response to the American invasion of their country. They not only didn't understand what was going on, they didn't even have the sequence of events right. There was an 18-year-old Yemeni man in Afghanistan at the time who thought he was on his way to college. He had sought letters of reference from his father's government contacts in Saudi Arabia, and in exchange for their support in getting him into a school, Mansour Adayfi had been sent to do some interviews with al-Qaeda leaders in Afghanistan for a publication the government of Saudi Arabia wanted to print. Americans were ill-equipped to hunt down al-Qaeda operatives on their own, and so they made the wretched decision to pay a bounty to Afghans who turned in members of al-Qaeda. So without any proof or documentation, any poor Afghan could settle a dispute with an angry neighbor or just earn a cool $1,000 or $2,000 American dollars by pointing at another Afghan and saying he was one of them. 86% of the prisoners at Guantanamo Bay were captured in just that way, almost all of them. Mansour was a kid. He was innocent, but he was held first in Afghanistan and then for 14 years in Guantanamo Bay. Driven by fear, determination, and a lust for revenge, Americans stared back into the abyss of terrorism so intently for so long that the abyss began to look back, and we became the monsters that we had set out to fight. I rarely read long passages in our sermons, but I want you to learn about Mansour's experience, and I want you to hear it in his own words. I've asked my friends, Mark and David, to join with me in reading some selected paragraphs from Mansour's personal account of his arrest, his torture in Afghanistan, and his transfer to Guantanamo Bay.
I waited in darkness for death. The interrogators were done with me. You aren't valuable enough to keep alive, they said. I didn't have the intelligence they wanted on Al-Qaeda's chain of command. They bound my hands with duct tape, then taped my eyes and ears. They taped my mouth and then pulled a hood over my head. They dragged me outside into the cold and forced me to my knees. I hadn't seen the light of day in weeks, and I thought I would never see blue sky again. I'd been kept hooded or inside dark rooms, stripped naked and beaten bloody for I don't know how long. Weeks, a month, maybe more. I was in Afghanistan, but I didn't know where. I'd never been in a situation I couldn't talk myself out of. None of that mattered when the United States started bombing and dropping leaflets offering reward money for Al-Qaeda and Taliban fighters. The warlords got a better price selling Arabs to the Americans.
A man cried close by. He begged someone to stop beating him. He begged for his life. This wasn't new. In the endless darkness, I'd heard women and children beg too. A soldier yelled, and then there was gunfire, but it wasn't for me. My heart pounded through my temples. I cried. Where would the bullet hit me? Would they shoot me in the head, in the chest? Would I feel pain? The rest of my life existed in these seconds and no more. I prayed again to Allah. I wished I wasn't so cold. I'd spent weeks in darkness, hanging from a ceiling, naked, beaten, electrocuted, until all that remained was pain, real pain, a pain I never imagined existed. I tried to figure out what I could say that would make them stop. I told them the truth, that I was a student, that I was 18, that I was from Yemen. I told them I wasn't a fighter, that I didn't hate America, that I wasn't Al-Qaeda. But they didn't want that. They wanted something from me I didn't have to give. They wanted me to admit that I was a man named Adel, an Egyptian Al-Qaeda recruiter, a terrorist who planned bombings. Fine. I'll be whoever you want me to be, I said. I'll be your Adel.
You're nothing now. No name, no family, no self. Only fear and darkness in the cold cavity of a military plane. You're gagged, hooded, blindfolded, and shackled, hands to ankles, ankles to the floor. Fists split your lips. Boots break one rib and then another. The pain of thirst, the pain in your bladder, the pain from hunching forward on a cold floor for hours until your body shakes. A man on each side of you rests his head on your back, and you're glad you can at least lessen someone else's pain. When the plane lands, they pull you up, push you down, and drag you off one plane and onto another. And how many times will they do this? You ask yourself, where are they taking me? What will happen to me? Will I die? You pray, but you can't hear yourself with the music so loud and the engines roaring. The plane roars on 10 hours, you think, 15 hours, 24 hours, 40 hours. The shackles are so tight you can't feel your hands or ankles anymore, so you pray that the plane crashes into the ocean and ends it all, because death would be better than this. Then you feel the descent in your stomach. You're losing altitude again. You pray that this is the end.
You have arrived, and they yell at you to stand, to move, to walk, but you can't. You're broken. You've been traveling for days, and your body refuses to follow their orders. They drag you off the boat. They cut your clothes off, strip you naked, and hose you down. You're barely 19, and all your life, you've never been naked in front of a woman. Now they make you stand for all to see, and you see women soldiers watching you. The humiliation burns. They take photos of you, every part of you, even your genitals. They give you a number and attach a plastic bracelet to your wrist that has your photograph and your new number. All you can think is that you want to wake up from this crazy nightmare. They hood you again. They throw you to the ground and pile on top of you and hold you down while someone searches your ass again in the worst way. They laugh. They drag your naked body across rocks and stones and gravel, and you feel your skin peel away, but don't feel the pain. Gate after gate opens, closes. You feel a boot, a punch. You see only black, but you feel their anger. One last gate opens and they throw you to the concrete floor, sit on you one more time, and remove the chains.
Which way to Mecca? You call out to the man in the cage next to you. Shut the fuck up, soldiers scream. But still you whisper through the fence. There's a sea here. Shut the fuck up, soldiers yell. Enough, you think. You stand. You call out to the men around you. You call out to find east so that you can pray. You call out to break this nonsense of no talking and no standing, and the soldiers call back to you with their fists and boots. 5 of them rush into your cage and slam your head to the ground again and again until your head bleeds and the message is received. You are nothing. I looked around my cage and found the foam sleep mat, a toothbrush, toothpaste, 2 blankets, a bar of soap, a pair of flip-flops, a canteen for water, 1 white bucket for shit and pee, and another white bucket for water. This was all I had now.
I didn't speak English, but I quickly learned the words they yelled and understood what they wanted me to do. The most important word was no. No sleeping, no standing, no talking, no looking at the soldiers. There was no limit to the word no or how the guards could use it, a word we were forbidden to say. It was impossible to keep up with every no, and it seemed that every rule broken was met with a punch, a slap, a boot, or worse, and that pack of guards in armor and shields who rushed your cage and knocked you to the ground. I'd soon realize it was all meant to keep us disoriented and weak for our interrogations. The soldiers had so much hate and fear. I knew by now that they thought I was Al-Qaeda and that I had something to do with the attacks on September 11. I had heard about the attacks on the radio in a restaurant in Afghanistan, and I didn't think anything of it. There were no TVs, no photographs of the event, and I couldn't imagine airplanes flying into buildings or why some would want to kill so many innocent people. What I knew about America I had learned from TV shows and movies, and I didn't hate it. I didn't love it either. I didn't know enough about it to even care. I was sorry to hear that innocent people had died, but I didn't understand what that had to do with me. None of it seemed real at the time. It still doesn't seem real. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a fighter. I believed that in time I could make them understand it was all a mistake. I had just said things in the black site to make them stop hurting me. This Adele, it was just an empty name. How could they be so afraid of me, a skinny 19-year-old too weak to stand? How could they be afraid of an old man or a boy who couldn't even grow a beard? What did they think I was capable of doing? I saw these questions written on the face of every man inside those cages.
I thought they couldn't hold us like this forever, and we all knew it was just a matter of time before something big happened. The interrogations got worse while the living conditions got a little better. The young soldiers in the camp seemed confused by us the more time they spent with us. I heard about brothers who could speak English, singing and rapping with soldiers. Even the Marine general who had helped end the hunger strike was overheard saying to a tour of civilians that the camp held mostly farmers, boys, and men with no fighting experience, not terrorists and killers. Weeks, we thought, months at the most, and we would be set free. They were just trying to squeeze us for any last drops of information before they released us. The older brothers, who were educated and knew about the world and international laws, said that the Americans couldn't hold us forever without a reason. It was against their laws. It was against international laws. But many brothers still thought we would be executed. They came from countries known to torture prisoners, and those prisoners never lived to tell about it. They were always executed instead of released. How can you just release hundreds of men they have tortured? On 9/11, the news reached me while I was having my teeth cleaned, actually sitting in my dentist's office, and he stopped and was distracted. The assistants all sort of hovered around, and we turned on a little tiny TV set that he had in the exam room and tried to figure out what was going on. But eventually he finished with my teeth as the media was trying to decide if it was an accident or a terrorist attack. I went down to my office, and my staff was all just sitting around listening to the radio and staring out the window. We tried to work for a little while, and nobody was getting anything done, so we closed early and headed home. I was shocked on the drive home to see that grocery store parking lots were full and that there were long lines at the gas stations. Did people here in southern Missouri believe that we were going to run out of food or fuel? When they heard that thousands of people had died in a terrorist attack in the Northeast, their first thought was to fill up their refrigerator and their gas tank? The only Muslim I knew in town at that time actually lived across the street from me. Fearing an anti-Muslim reaction all over the United States, I went over to check on him, and predictably his wife was in tears, and she said that her husband was in hiding in an undisclosed location. Threatening messages from some co-workers had made him realize that he might be the target of a redneck reprisal, and so he booked himself into a hotel room and hunkered down to stay out of sight. I didn't know what to do, so I mowed his yard. It needed to be mown, and I needed to show him a sign of kindness and acceptance that I was afraid he wouldn't get from most of his coworkers and our neighbors. But the very next day, I noticed that those annoying "What would Jesus do" bracelets had all disappeared. All the convenience stores had them out on their counters. They were for sale in card shops and dime stores. And I even went to some of the places where I was accustomed to seeing them. They'd all disappeared overnight. No one in this overtly religious community wanted to ask that question right now. They knew what they were going to do, at least at some level. They also knew that Jesus wouldn't launch an all-out attack on anybody. So Jesus' stock value fell precipitously on the first 9/11. At the risk of stating the obvious, terrorists do what they do to make people feel afraid. And on 9/11, most Americans were all too willing to react exactly the way that Osama bin Laden wanted them to react. People were terrified. They thought of themselves. They rushed out to buy supplies before anyone else could get them. Many people even covered their windows with plastic and duct tape in case chemical warfare was next. And since, as you know, Springfield, Missouri is so strategically important to the defense of North America, many of our neighbors acted quickly. But fear does not stay in its most simple form of trembling and hiding. Fear becomes anger. If you didn't know this before, please hear me now. The root ingredient of anger is fear. Especially men are raised to believe that you can quash all of your emotions by acting angry. If you're angry, then you can act like you're strong, even if it's a sign of weakness. The first thing I think you should ask yourself when you feel angry is, what am I afraid of? What is it that I'm actually afraid of? In the aftermath of 9/11, we were afraid that someone would do it again and that maybe we were next. Our anger needed a target, but Al-Qaeda isn't a nation. They had training camps in Afghanistan, but the Taliban ruled the nation of Afghanistan, but they didn't attack us. The Taliban had not tried to organize an attack on the United States. They may have been complicit in letting Al-Qaeda have camps there, but they were not organized enough to keep them out. The Girl Scouts could have put camps in Afghanistan. The Taliban couldn't do much about it. But we were angry, and so we didn't just attack Al-Qaeda training camps. We attacked the whole nation of Afghanistan and went after their government. And because we were still afraid after we had done that, we took over Afghanistan in a couple of weeks. We also invaded Iraq, and they had nothing to do with 9/11. They were not even Al-Qaeda. The government of Iraq was contemptuous of Al-Qaeda. But Dick Cheney had been looking for an easy war to start and to win so that Halliburton sales would go up, and Iraq was just sitting there. They had been disarmed, they had no air force, they had no navy, and they had a whole lot of Muslims, and it was easy to sell a war on Iraq. And very few Americans objected because we weren't just afraid of Al-Qaeda. We weren't just afraid of Osama bin Laden. We didn't understand Muslim extremists, and so we were afraid of all Muslims. Not at all unlike assuming that all Christians are like Timothy McVeigh of Oklahoma City bombing fame. If we assume that every Baptist and Catholic was a potential bomber because they went to church on Sundays. We were the victims of a heinous terrorist attack on 9/11, an attack that killed nearly 3,000 innocent people. In response, we have attacked two nations in the longest sustained warfare in American history, neither of which had anything to do with 9/11. We have killed millions and impoverished millions more in the process of conducting a war on terrorism. We became terrorists. We swept up thousands of innocent people and disappeared them into black sites no journalist had ever seen, where they were tortured, many tortured to death. Then we established this prison off American shores in Cuba, where the prying eyes of the media couldn't see what we were doing. Oh, we debated whether or not waterboarding was torture, and I'm not dismissing waterboarding because it is torture, but you know, after hearing Mansour's testimony, the issue wasn't waterboarding. This is what fear does to us. We gaze into the abyss until we become the monsters we feared. Millions are killed, wounded, impoverished, or frankly, radicalized by what we did. Mansoor Adayfi was just a kid who was in the wrong place at the wrong time when America went crazy with fear. His story is just one story of thousands of people that we tortured illegally, immorally, and for years and years after we realized that, frankly, torture doesn't provide reliable intelligence, especially when you're torturing a kid who has no information to give up. What I am asking of you today on this 21st anniversary of 9/11 is to simply stop being afraid. I want you to stop being afraid of other religions. I'm asking you to stop being afraid of immigrants. I want you to stop being afraid of other races. I want you to stop being afraid of people who have different sexual orientations or different accents or politics. Please, please stop becoming allies to our terrorists by doing them the favor of living in fear, which only fuels your anger, because anger can turn America into a monster.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.